Sir.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We talked about it a bit earlier in the program. The most entertaining moment of last night's State of the Union address was when Biden thanked Justice Stephen Breyer for his service and offered him the customary flattery of his tenure as a Supreme Court justice. And then Breyer was sort of like limp-wristed, covering his face, and oh, you stop. I mean, it was like a Sally Field, you like me, you really like me kind of moment. It was weird.
I know. I felt uncomfortable, I got to tell you.
I mean,
Who, me? This guy in the black robe? Right? Me?
Yeah, it was something. But that was the predicate to, of course, reference Ketanji Brown Jackson, President Biden's nominee to replace Breyer on the High Court, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals judge, by way of the D.C. Circuit Court. And when she was introduced last week, she offered a bit of background on her family and her personal history, including familial history. And we play this on Monday, but in advance of our conversation with Lionel Shriver, let's play it again.
My life has been blessed beyond measure. And I do know that one can only come this far by faith. Among my many blessings, and indeed the very first, is the fact that I was born in this great country. The United States of America is the greatest beacon of hope and democracy the world has ever known. I was also blessed from my early days to have had a supportive and loving family. My mother and father, who have been married for 54 years, are at their home in Florida right now, and I know that they could not be more proud. It was my father who started me on this path when I was a child, as the president mentioned. My father made the fateful decision to transition from his job as a public high school history teacher and go to law school. Some of my earliest memories are of him sitting at the kitchen table, reading his law books. I watched him study, and he became my first professional role model. My mother, who was also a public high school teacher, provided invaluable support in those early days, working full-time to enable my father's career transition while also guiding and inspiring 4-year-old me.
So it's interesting because that's not what you expect from the modern day left. Somebody who
loves God and family.
Yeah, right. Faith, faith family or faith country family. It's not what you expect. There's not a sad sack story. She clearly comes from a middle to upper income family. She is married to a white guy who's actually a descendant of Oliver Wendell Holmes. Wow. It's not exactly like Clarence Thomas growing up in Pinpoint, Georgia, with no with no indoor plumbing, right, and a real connection to slavery, actually. And there's also this too. A lot of mention that she's on the board of overseers at Harvard, and she is, and that calls to my question whether or not she'll have to recuse herself in that Harvard we dislike Asians case, so we cook their character scores to prevent them from admittance. But there's also this from Ed Whalen over at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She was a advisory school board member for the now defunct Montrose Christian School in Rockville, Maryland. This is back a bit ago, decade plus ago. But it was a Baptist school that provides, quote, Christ-centered education for the glory of the Savior and the good of society. The statement of truths at the school included, he created male and female as the crowning work of his creation. The gift of gender is thus a part of the goodness of God's creation. Christians should oppose racism, every form of greed, selfishness, and vice, and all forms of sexual immorality, including adultery, homosexuality, and pornography. We should speak on behalf of the unborn and contend for the sanctity of all human life from conception to natural death. Marriage is the uniting of one man and one woman in covenant commitment for a lifetime. Covenant commitment for a lifetime, that is. Those were the truths of the school on which he was an advisory board member. So, the question becomes a little bit, is she a bit of a fox in the henhouse when it comes to what she had to say when she was introduced to the nation by Biden on Friday, and some of her past work, as we've seen social justice Catholics and Christians infiltrate to politicize the church or denominational schools? Or is this who she actually is, but she subordinates those beliefs and her own experience in service of the sort of administrative elite in order for career advancement? It's just an interesting discussion because she cuts a different profile than your Sotomayors or even your Elena Kagans. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Lionel Shriver. She's the best-selling author of What's the Matter with Kevin, and also, what's the matter? We need to talk about Kevin. What's the matter with me? And also contributor to the Spectator. Lionel Shriver, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, it's nice to talk to you again.
So what's your take on the litmus test, first of all, for this nominee, and then what we've seen from her and know about her to this point?
Well, if the background you just read is accurate, then the joke would be on the Biden administration for privileging her race and sex above all else, and inadvertently finding a more conservative Supreme Court justice than they counted on.
And that would be something, wouldn't it, Lionel? Because, that never happens. It's always conservatives that move left. I can't think of a leftist who became more conservative on the bench.
That's true. That's been the direction of travel consistently. I did not like it that Biden announced in advance that his primary criterion was that the nominee would be a black woman. I think that it taints her nomination because we have been apprised that all the other competing candidates who didn't meet the racial and sex requirement were going to be eliminated. And for all we know, she really is the most qualified candidate in the entire country. And by sheer coincidence, it turns out that it's a black woman. But, he could at least have kept his mouth shut on this, then nominated a black woman. We might have our suspicions that this was motivated by affirmative action, but we wouldn't be sure. And now he's been very clear on it.
Yeah,
and let's get. This is not an isolated incident. This is what Biden has done ever since he became president. I think we all remember when we were hearing about the whole slew of his staff and cabinet appointments, and the mainstream media announced with virtually every one of them, joyfully, the first Indian American, the first black American, whatever, the first gay transportation secretary. Pete Buttigieg is primary qualification for that position is being gay.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I don't.
He likes airports.
Last I checked, didn't mean that you knew a lot about transport. The whole box ticking thing is obnoxious. It's not the way to get a qualified workforce, and it's an ugly, diminishing way of thinking about people.
But don't you think they feel bad? Don't you think deep down inside Pete Buttigieg, he knows that he's not qualified to be transportation secretary, but
Don't you think that they know that they were chosen because they were gay or Indian American, things like that?
Well, that depends on their honesty with themselves. So we can't know. But I think that in general, this whole thing of using race and sex preferences is undermining of the very people they're trying to help. That includes the individuals who benefit from it because they would have a rational sense of self-doubt that they would have been appointed if it hadn't been for the accident of the race or sex or sexual preference they were born into. And it also has a more general effect of sending the message that if you are a member of any of these minorities, then you need help, right? You're only going to succeed by being given special treatment. And, that's terrifically undermining. I think it's significant that the majority of American blacks do not like affirmative action, even in education. They would rather qualify like everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something
I think that affirmative action has become one of the main drivers of any persistent racial prejudice in the United States.
Yeah, it's something, this is another area, it seems to me, where there's massive disconnect between the so-called cultural elites and regular right-thinking people, commonsensical people. And the ability or the capacity for self-delusion, I think the left understands it much better than the right does. It is infinite. And one of the ways that some of these identitarians delude themselves is by what? What we said and what the D.C. press corps said and was the mantra in the run-up to Obama's election, President of the United States, let's make history. Let's not make a judgment based on the merits, who's the best leader, who has the best ideas, who's going to serve the country the best. Let's just make history. And so it's become this, let's just continue to make history over and over again and continue to come up with marginalized populations that we can make history with. So who wouldn't want to be the Jackie Robinson of the trans movement, as Leah Thomas, the Pennsylvania swimmer, calls himself? Who wouldn't want to be the first gay transportation secretary if you're gay? I'm making history for my community. Right, that has such appeal because there's such status conferred to that comes with it.
Well, this whole idea of making history is that it's thinking of people as representatives of their groups rather than individuals. Now, I will concede I voted for Obama, and I considered the fact that he would be the first half-black president a plus. But I would not have voted for him if I didn't also consider him highly capable, articulate, intelligent. I mean, we, if anything, over-celebrated him for his race, but I thought he was I was happy to vote for him as a person, as a candidate, as a president.
Well, I mean, again, I get the appeal, although in Chicago we had a little bit better handle on him. Some of us did than the rest of the country did upon first introduction. And, John McCain wasn't particularly exciting, the inflaming the hearts of conservatives back in 2008 either. But I mean, but yeah, you take my point, though. It's the over-celebration, it's the over-emphasis, and it's the sort of lack of assessments of character and capacity to the exclusion, because you're exclusively focused on non-behavioral identity characteristics. And this seems to me a huge divide in this country right now, even as Biden makes the pro forma unity call yesterday. And as you're pointing out, particularly with black Americans, the left is increasingly on the wrong side of that divide, and this is something conservatives should be prosecuting, not running away from, whether it takes the form of curriculum in K through 12 education or quota picks for the high court.
Well, also, when you make history, as you said, and appoint someone who is incapable, you make bad history.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid we've got a prime example in Kamala Harris, who is utterly incompetent.
Oh boy.
Can't hold her own in public. Can't say anything when she's put on the spot. And so here she was wildly celebrated as the first female vice president, and the first, she gets to double up with the first black and first Indian vice president, and she's made history. But now she's become an embarrassment.
Oh yeah,
no question about with each
I don't know if
passing
she
day.
heard the hustle interview. I don't know if you should play that.
She is completely ridiculous. I wouldn't. Yeah, if I was, her composition of ethnic heritage or one of the multiple, I wouldn't be running around claiming her. That's for sure. She is Lionel Shriver. She's a contributor to The Spectator, best-selling author of We Need to Talk About Kevin, which was optioned into a successful movie, I'm sure you know. And Should We Stay or Should We Go? Lionel Shriver, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a paid political announcement.
When Richard Irvin decided to take on Pritzker for governor, he wasn't following a whim. He was answering a long